wrapping up in terms of our natural resources is going to be Dr. Barry Knox, who has been involved and very engaged with Lieutenant Nock and others across the Upstate for quite a long time to sort of give us a little insight related to land use.
I'd like to sort of give an overview of land use in the Upstate and how it's changed over the last 30 years and what some projections for the future might be. Certainly, we all know what a wonderful place the Upstate is. We know that the values, the vision areas of 10 at the top really summarize the kind of strengths that we have. And one of the issues that I think is most important for us to think about is what choices do we make individually, what choices do we make collectively that affect our future, that can preserve those qualities, that can protect us while we continue to grow and prosper economically. So the real question is, how do we use our land? What land do we develop? What land do we preserve? What do we maintain in forests, in open space, and agricultural? Where do we develop? How much can we redevelop? Where can we infill? Where can we develop in areas that have water, sewer, and other infrastructure? Certainly, infrastructure is a key to development. In fact, as we heard earlier, the development of the large manufacturing firms, the development of jobs, comes when you have water, sewer, roads, connections to markets, connections to good schools, and so on. So I'll talk a little bit about past trends in population and land cover, talk a little bit about projections, and identify some issues. I have to say where I'm going and how I'm going to get there. Students always are wondering where they are, let alone where I am. But that's a whole other issue. This is land cover from satellite imagery in 1992. Basically, red is development, yellow is agricultural, open space, green is forest. And it's not necessarily managed forest, it's it's land that has trees on it. Lots of fairly dense tree cover on it. So you can see primarily greens and yellow. You see it gets 2000 more yellow, red splotches, less green. Show that again. You can see how the green, we have less green, more yellow, more red, a lot more red. So we're growing, we're developing. More land is being developed. As we'll see, and this is looking at urban land in terms of developed land that really falls around the urbanized areas, around most towns and municipalities in the region. Much of it is fairly low density, relatively little amount of high dense urban land. This is looking at the change by type. So you can see that the tree cover forested land has decreased, agricultural land is flattened out, development continues to grow. And looking at that same data, I guess more clearly in terms of the amount of land, in terms of square miles gained or lost, you can see a little over 1,000 square miles of forest land, tree-covered land, being taken up by either agricultural open space or development. So looking at the change in particular, we see basically looking at the deep red and the yellow areas in which we have change over the last 30 years. And that large map's kind of hard to see. Kind of taking a tour around the Upstate, starting in the west of Oconee. Again, you can see the red and yellow filling in around the lake in various areas. And I guess what's slightly scary about the yellow is that you're getting clearing in those areas that used to be forested. In Greenville, you can see the major developed area, you can see area developing around it. You can see the jaws of Greer trying to chew up more things. I hope Mary Dan isn't here. You hear that? So the growth there, Spartanburg, again, growth on the west side of Spartanburg toward Greenville and Greer, filling in. This is Union, Lawrence, not as much growth there, a few spots of development, but still mostly green. Abbeville, Greenwood, development around Greenwood you can see there. And then Anderson, the scale's a little different, so it's bigger. But a lot of infill and development around Anderson, around Lake Hartwell. In terms of what measure of this is density. Now, when you think of density, you think of people per square mile. Well, given that we know how much land is developed, what if we looked at the number of people per developed land? Not too many people, there are people that live in forests and trees, I guess. But just looking at the number of people in the land that's developed, the really scary thing about this is that over time, the density, the number of people per square mile of developed land, is shrinking. We're becoming less dense. Development is less dense now than it was before. It's spreading out considerably. And if you look here, the lines make it a little more clear, although to get this really cool green and orange background, I lost the color on this slide. But the line in the middle here is the region as a whole. So density is falling. Overall, from about 2,000 people per square mile of developed land to about 1,200 people per square mile overall in the region. The orange line is Greenville, Spartanburg counties. The line at the bottom is Abbeville, Greenwood, Lawrence. Here's Cherokee Union, and the red is Anderson and Coney Higgins. So it's a little discouraging to see us spreading out in the region. Looking to the future, population projections are guesstimates. They're good guesses, are meant to be good guesses. Basically, they're projecting growth. This is the Census Bureau, projects growth over the next 30 years in the region. We will grow, we expect to grow, both in terms of jobs and residents. Being optimistic here. How do we develop? This decrease in density is a representation of the fact that our use of land is occurring at about 4 times the rate of population growth. In other words, the amount of developed land is growing much faster than the rate at which population grows. So the chart here on your left is basically what the trend has been. You can see the splotch of, if we follow that trend, you can see the developed area covering pretty much the I-84 corridor, sprawling out over other corridors. If we can reduce that use of land by 40%, then we have a much smaller footprint. This is consistent with surveys and information that we've received from 10 at the top over various surveys that we've done over the last few years, where most people, basically 80% of those surveyed, would like to see a reduction in the amount of land use we have. Students, CU-ICAR students in planning have looked at land use and looked at land characteristics and trying to look at projections of what might be and where development might occur. Have looked at a number of factors that would frame development. One would, of course, be environmental conditions, looking at the northern tier of the region in terms of the mountains, in terms of the slopes, the lakes, lake areas, as areas that you want to preserve. Another way of viewing that is to look at those resources in terms of size of parcels that exist for preservation. And again, you can see them at the extremes of the region, so national forests, land split and protection, easements, and so on. Agricultural lands are another area that you want to preserve. These top-level, most productive agricultural lands in the Upstate, given soil characteristics, given flatness, and so on, and their use as agriculture. So identifying all of those, basically saving the areas that you want to preserve due to agriculture or environmental sensitivity leads to a number of areas where development is most desirable. Basically, primary zones for development are in the deep red, secondary zones in the orange. And looking at that in terms of trends, you see a similar pattern, filling in along 85 and the other patterns, but trying to compress that and make it sort of contiguous to existing development. A vision plan, which basically would reduce the land use for development by about 20%, basically has that even more compressed, more condensed. And based on that, an overall land use plan showing areas for primary development, areas for stewardship, environmental protection, and so on. Okay, so we've seen what the pattern has been for the last 30 years. We see some projections for the future. The idea of these projections, the hope of these projections, is to really encourage discussions. Given what we're doing, what are the likely consequences? What can we do about them? What do we want to do about them? Upstate land, these maps really are about the region. You see, most of them are 10-county maps. But decisions are made locally. Decisions are made by municipalities. Decisions are made at the county level in terms of land use. We want to grow. We want economic development. We want to balance economic growth, quality of life. And quality of life and economic growth go hand in hand. Companies don't locate here because, or don't go to a place because it's unattractive. They go to places that are attractive. They go to places where they have a good workforce. They go to places where they have access to markets. So how do we do that? How do we protect the environment? How do we maintain growth? A lot of things here in the slide. We make choices. Individual landowners make choices in terms of development. Regions, counties, cities make choices in terms of regulation and development and infrastructure. A whole range of city and county level controls exist. You're familiar with many of them. One aspect here that I'll emphasize is the notion of infrastructure. Cities and counties should be doing capital improvement plans. They should be identifying where roads, water, sewers, schools, other parks, other infrastructure will develop, will be placed. Where that infrastructure is placed makes for attractive land for development. And the more you can do that, the better off you are. The toolkit that Dean indicated, I think it's on the website. It's available, I'll sign copies. And it has a whole range of options and tools, some of which are listed here. We make decisions at a regional level in terms of airports and other things that were discussed earlier that affect growth. I mentioned infrastructure. Certainly, the cost of infrastructure affects where location is. It also affects what taxes we pay. The more efficient we are, the less we pay for things. There are a range of development issues. What do we protect? How do we promote environmental stewardship? How do we promote economic development in terms of access to markets, with airports, with highways, and other access? And how do we promote community vibrancy? How do we maintain these wonderful towns that we have, these wonderful urban cores, as well as the attractive rural areas, as well as the beautiful parks? So the choice is ours. Where we grow is based on our decisions, our choices, in terms of public plans and actions, individual development decisions, private choices. We have to pay for it, we have to figure out what we're going to do, and we have to figure out how we're going to maintain our quality of life.